Imagine sinking into a world where sunlight dies, where pressure could crush a submarine, and where creatures glow like living neon signs just to survive. Down here, jaws unhinge wider than physics should allow. Stomachs stretch like elastic bags of chaos, and camouflage gets so advanced that animals basically cosplay as pure darkness. Entire food webs run on drifting snow made of ocean leftovers. Cities spring up around underwater volcanoes powered by chemical magic, and enormous migrations rise and fall every single night like a hidden ocean rush hour. And the wildest part? We still barely know what's actually down here. The Midnight Zone is Earth's strangest, darkest, most creative workshop. An alien world on our own planet, packed with secrets and surprises that keep outsmarting our best technology. So buckle in, because once you take this plunge, you won't come back looking at the ocean or life quite the same way again. Imagine dropping beneath the waves, watching the surface light fade from bright gold to bruised blue to a kind of dim twilight that feels like the ocean is slowly closing its eyelids. You keep sinking, expecting your eyes to adjust, but they never do. Because down here, after about 1,000 meters, light isn't just dim, it is gone. The ocean's midnight zone does not offer partial darkness or a polite, moody ambience. It offers absolute, unforgiving black. It is a darkness so thick you start to wonder whether it has weight. And in a way it does. Not metaphorically, though the place is very much metaphor-friendly, but literally. Because this darkness comes hand in hand with pressure so intense, it feels like the ocean is giving you a very firm, very insistent hug. The kind you cannot politely decline. But before we ever talk about pressure gauges or biological wizardry, this first plunge is about that moment of emotional disorientation, when the world you know disappears and a new one begins to flicker into reality. Because even in this absolute void, something glows. At first, it is subtle, like a firefly conserving its last bit of battery power. But then you begin to notice more. Tiny sparks drifting around you, faint pulses, dots of light dancing in a realm where light has no business existing. They are not reflections, not sunlight, not the ocean playing tricks. These glimmers belong to creatures who evolved to glow on purpose, as casually as you might turn on a flashlight, except they do it with chemistry, not batteries. Down here, illumination is not a luxury. It is a survival strategy, a social signal, a lure, a warning, a disguise. But right now, as you descend, all you know is that the darkness is not empty. It is alive. Your imagination kicks in before the science does. You start picturing what kind of creatures could thrive in a world like this. Slowly the hints appear, shapes slipping through the dark, textures you can't quite identify, outlines that fade as quickly as they form. In every direction, the environment feels unfamiliar, like stepping into a dream where the physics have been rewritten just slightly wrong. It is the kind of place that makes you whisper, even if no one else is around. Even the silence feels alive. If outer space is the final frontier, this is the frontier that hides beneath your feet, almost smug about how well it has kept its secrets. A strange mix of fear and awe washes over you. We humans tend to be deeply uncomfortable when we cannot see what is around us. Our brains prefer clear horizons and well-lit rooms where we can confirm that the coat on the chair is not a lurking predator. Down here, the brain cannot perform its usual threat assessments. It is like walking into a pitch-black basement and knowing the basement is 1,000 miles wide, filled with animals you have never met and who have never met sunlight. And yet, the fear doesn't stay fear. It turns into wonder, because the more your eyes search the darkness, the more you start to appreciate how incredible it is that anything lives here at all. The Midnight Zone is one of the planet's largest habitats, stretching across most of the globe. Yet most people will never see it, not even in pictures. Cameras struggle here. Light behaves differently. Electronics complain. Machines creak under the pressure. This means that every glimpse we get feels like stolen knowledge from a world that prefers to stay private. And every glowing creature you spot, drifting past your mental submersible, feels like a reminder that life is stubborn and imaginative. Some animals create light, others swallow it, and many use the darkness the way we use walls and roofs, as a form of shelter. Hover in this world for a moment. Let your senses adjust to the idea that darkness is not the absence of life, but the canvas for it. You begin to suspect that the Midnight Zone is not frightening at all, not once your mind reframes it. Instead of seeing emptiness, you start to see possibility. Instead of imagining lurking dangers, you notice how calm and quiet everything seems. The ocean here moves slowly, almost reverently, as though the water itself is careful not to disturb its residents. Your heartbeat slows to match the stillness. It feels less like a descent into danger, and more like stepping into someone else's cathedral. This is where the real intrigue begins. Because once you accept the darkness, you begin to appreciate its artistry. Creatures glow with blues and greens because those colours travel best underwater. Their pulses of light look like coded messages, each blink hinting at stories we barely understand. Some flashes lure prey, others call for mates. Some warn predators to back off. It is a kind of communication system that has evolved independently across countless species, like the ocean's version of social media, but with significantly fewer arguments. And as you drift in this strange, silent landscape, you sense that the darkness is not merely a backdrop, it is the architect of everything that lives here. In this world, energy, movement, senses, and anatomy have all been reinvented. Nothing here resembles the creatures of the surface, but everything here has a purpose. The Midnight Zone is not nature's afterthought. It is one of her boldest experiments. So the hook is simple. In a place where sunlight dies, life refuses to follow it. Instead, it adapts, glows, whispers, and thrives in ways that reshape our understanding of what survival means. It is not a world of chaos. It is a world of quiet brilliance. And now that you have seen the darkness flicker to life, the journey into the Midnight Zone can truly begin. If the Midnight Zone had a real estate listing, it would be the kind of place that makes you wonder whether the agent lost a bet. Imagine a basement apartment so deep underground, the sun has not bothered visiting since the dawn of time. The walls are always damp, the lighting is non-existent, the thermostat is permanently stuck near freezing, and the pressure is so immense, it feels like the building above you is actively trying to sit on your chest. And yet somehow, tenants still live here, creatures that have not just adapted to these conditions, but embraced them as though this is the cosmic equivalent of a cozy neighborhood. For humans, the Midnight Zone is unlivable. For its residents, it is home sweet abyss. Let us start with the pressure, because nothing defines this region quite like the immense weight of the water above it. For every 10 meters you descend, the pressure increases by roughly the amount of the atmosphere you are used to at the surface. By the time you reach the Midnight Zone, you are dealing with hundreds of atmospheres pressing inward on every square inch of your existence. It is like wearing an invisible anvil suit, tailored by the world's angriest blacksmith. If you attempted to stroll in without specialized equipment, you would experience the world's least fun instant makeover. But the creatures that live here have evolved bodies without air spaces, no hollow bones, no pockets of gas, so the pressure rolls off them the way mild inconveniences roll off extremely laid-back people. Now consider the temperature. It hovers just above freezing, often around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. It is not the refreshing chill of a well-maintained fridge. It is more like the forgotten corner of an old freezer where even the ice cubes do not want to live. The cold is relentless, consistent, and unchanging. Seasons do not really exist here. Summer does not bring sunshine. Winter does not bring snow. The calendar might as well be a blank sheet. If tropical reefs throw a party every afternoon, the midnight zone is the neighbor who taped a quiet please sign to the universe and meant it. And then there is the darkness. Not the kind you experience when you switch off your lights, because at least then your brain knows the sun is waiting outside. This darkness is permanent, primal, and complete. Once sunlight reaches the upper layers of water, it scatters, softens, and eventually disappears entirely. By the time you sink to the midnight zone, the idea of color stops making sense. Red wavelengths vanish first, then orange, then yellow, until blue and violet fade into nothingness, like shy guests leaving a party early. Down here, your flashlight is not just helpful. It is your only connection to the concept of sight. The darkness is so absolute that even shadows refuse to form. They need light to exist. And down here, light is as rare as a polite seagull. But these harsh conditions do not exist in isolation. They shape the very physics of the place. Sound behaves differently in this pressurized world. Water becomes a better conductor, allowing noises to travel farther, often distorting them into deep groans or eerie echoes that feel like the ocean's attempt at ghost storytelling. Even movement is affected. Swimming in this dense, cold, heavy environment means expending far more energy than in the shallows, which is one reason many deep-sea creatures move slowly and deliberately, as though they are practicing underwater Tai Chi. And yet, in a bizarre twist that only nature could design, these conditions create a stable environment. The midnight zone does not change quickly. Storms on the surface, irrelevant, shifting tides, barely felt. Temperature swings, unheard of. It is one of the most constant ecosystems on Earth, which means organisms can evolve extremely fine-tuned traits that remain relevant for millions of years. It is almost funny. The very conditions that make the midnight zone look like nature forgot to enable the comfort settings also make it a remarkably predictable place. If the surface ocean is a bustling city, the midnight zone is the quiet countryside, cold, dim, and not particularly interested in newcomers. Of course, if you tried to live here, you would last approximately the amount of time it takes to say, "I regret this decision." Your lungs would object immediately, your bones would consider retirement, and your internal organs would send out a beautifully choreographed distress email. But the creatures that call this place home were built, or rather, sculpted over countless generations, to thrive. They are not inconvenienced by the pressure or the cold or the dark. They are shaped by it. If anything, the midnight zone's conditions are a reminder that life is astonishingly creative in the face of limitations. When the universe said, "You can live anywhere except here," life looked around, shrugged, and started unpacking. The darkness became a refuge. The pressure became background noise. The cold became a permanent wardrobe choice. And the result is an environment that feels more like an alien planet than a part of our own ocean. So yes, the Midnight Zone could win every award for Earth's most extreme basement apartment, complete with no heating, crushed ceilings, and non-existent windows. But its residents are not just surviving, they are thriving in a way that rewrites what survival even means. And the more we learn about these conditions, the more the place feels less like a forbidding void and more like a masterpiece of natural engineering, built with the kind of confidence only nature can get away with. Picture yourself trying to navigate a room so dark that even the concept of bumping into something feels optimistic. At least bumping would mean you located an object. Now imagine that room stretched into a miles-deep landscape, complete with moving animals, drifting food, unpredictable currents, and the occasional opportunistic predator with jaws that do not understand personal boundaries. That is the daily navigation challenge of life in the Midnight Zone. With light permanently absent, vision steps off the evolutionary stage, and a new cast of sensory strategies takes over. Strange, brilliant, and oddly graceful methods that make our familiar senses feel outdated. Like trying to text on an ancient flip phone while these creatures are running biological supercomputers. The first major tool in this sensory toolkit is vibration detection. In the Midnight Zone, movement is not seen, it is felt. Water is an excellent transmitter of vibration, and animals here have turned that fact into a navigational superpower. Some species possess elongated lateral lines, subtle canals along their bodies filled with cells that read vibrations the way your fingertips read Braille. A slight shift in the water, maybe from a passing animal, a distant fin beat, or a drifting piece of debris, can be interpreted like a message delivered straight through the skin. It is not just sensing motion, it is sensing motion with context. Imagine being able to detect a stranger walking across your living room carpet based only on how the floorboards sigh. Deep-sea creatures take that idea and push it well beyond anything humans could ever do. For them, every ripple is a clue, and every clue is potential food, danger, or company. Some animals take this even further by generating their own vibrations. Certain fish produce low-frequency pulses as a kind of echolocation light, subtle enough to stay hidden from predators, but strong enough to map nearby objects. It is nature's version of gently tapping the walls to find the studs, except the studs are other living beings, and the tapping is performed by a creature whose entire survival depends on interpreting the echo correctly. In the absence of sight, vibration becomes the closest thing to a full-body flashlight. But sensing the world is not only about movement, it is also about chemistry. In a place where the scenery is invisible, the water becomes a library of smells, chemical trails drifting through the depths like scented postcards from faraway creatures. Many Midnight Zone animals rely heavily on chemoreception, detecting substances dissolved in the water with astonishing precision. A predator might follow the faint hint of amino acids left behind by a stressed prey item, while scavengers can track the molecular gossip released from a distant carcass, slowly sinking through the water column. This chemical awareness is not just sensitive, it is selective. Some animals can tell whether a chemical trace is fresh or old, whether it comes from a potential mate or a potential meal, whether it signals a threat or merely a passerby. Humans, by comparison, struggle to identify whether milk in the fridge is still good, and we have to open the container and sniff like confused raccoons. Deep-sea animals do the same kind of analysis from tens or hundreds of meters away with zero hesitation. Their world is built from molecules, and they read those molecules with the ease of someone scanning headlines. Then there is sound, one of the most underrated aspects of deep-sea perception. Without light, sound becomes the long-distance communicator. Low-frequency noises can travel extraordinary distances underwater, turning the midnight zone into a vast cathedral of echoes and murmurs. Some fish use specialized structures to pick up these sounds, detecting everything from far-off movements to the low groaning of shifting water masses. Certain species have ears refined enough to hear prey long before they get close, using audio cues not as optional enhancements, but as core survival tools. In a place where speed is rarely an option and energy must be conserved, listening becomes a lifestyle. You do not have to swim around searching for food if you can simply wait and tune in like a biological radio. The most successful midnight zone hunters are often those that expend the least energy chasing random shadows. They simply let the ocean carry information to them. But perhaps the most enchanting part of this sensory world is how seamlessly all these tools blend together. A creature might detect a faint vibration, confirm it with a chemical trace, then triangulate it using sound. This is multisensory problem-solving in its purest form, performed by animals who cannot see more than a suggestion of shapes, if they can see anything at all. Yet their precision rivals, and often surpasses, that of surface creatures who rely on bright, comforting sunlight to make sense of things. And while all these senses sound hyper-technical, there is a poetic elegance to how they operate. Instead of perceiving a three-dimensional landscape through light bouncing off objects, deep-sea animals construct their world through invisible cues, ripples, molecules, echoes. It is like experiencing reality through secrets rather than sights. Each sense reveals a fragment of the truth, and together they paint a complete picture that no single sense could achieve alone. Navigating the midnight zone is not about seeing where you are. It is about understanding what surrounds you. It is about interpreting the tiniest signals from the water and trusting that those signals form a map. Down here, perception is not a passive process, it is an art form. And the creatures who master it move through the darkness with a confidence that borders on serene, proving that you do not need light to understand the world. You simply need the right ways to listen to it. If the Midnight Zone had a nightlife district, bioluminescence would be the glitzy row of neon signs blinking, open, closed, danger, dinner, and please don't eat me, all at once. Down here, where sunlight has filed a permanent leave of absence request, organisms have taken it upon themselves to manufacture their own illumination. It is not decorative. It is not mood lighting. It is a biological Swiss Army knife, one that sparkles, flashes, pulses, and glows with more style than anything happening on the surface. In a world carved from darkness, light becomes currency, communication, and camouflage, all rolled into one glowing package. To understand why bioluminescence became the hottest trend in the abyss, you must first understand how the glow actually happens. At its core, bioluminescence is a carefully orchestrated chemical reaction between a light-producing molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. When luciferin meets luciferase in the presence of oxygen, energy is released as visible photons. It is chemistry's equivalent of striking a match. If matches were self-repairing, waterproof, cold-resistant, pressure-proof, reusable, and capable of producing multiple colors on command. Some species even use symbiotic bacteria to handle the illumination for them, outsourcing their glow the way someone might hire a lighting designer to get the ambience just right. but the glow itself is only the beginning. What truly makes bioluminescence fascinating is how creatively animals in the midnight zone deploy it. Imagine going to a city where every streetlight doubles as a security system, every billboard can rearrange itself, and every shop sign can temporarily blind a suspicious stranger. That is the midnight zone on a typical Tuesday evening. One of the most famous uses of bioluminescence is luring prey. When food is scarce and surprises everything, glowing becomes the equivalent of waving a free sample tray in front of hungry passers-by. The iconic anglerfish, though it is just one example among many, dangles a glowing lure to tempt curious creatures toward its otherwise invisible mouth. Many smaller fish do the same, but with added finesse, wiggling their bioluminescent bait like miniature cosmic yo-yos. Down here, curiosity does not kill the cat. It kills the fish that swam a little too close to the wrong shimmering dot. But glowing is not only useful for attracting things, it is equally handy for repelling them. Some animals produce explosive bursts of bioluminescent fluid, creating a sudden cloud of shimmering light that confuses predators and gives the would-be meal just enough time to vanish. It is the underwater equivalent of throwing glitter in someone's face and sprinting in the opposite direction. Certain shrimp species are particularly fond of this method, releasing bright chemical bursts with the theatrical flair of magicians tossing flash powder. Bioluminescence also serves as a communication system, one built not on sound or symbols but on light choreography. Some animals flash in patterns specific to their species, ensuring they attract the right mates and avoid awkward misidentifications. Others use glowing signals to maintain social groupings in the dark, functioning like twinkling name tags floating through the water. Some species even shift the brightness or rhythm of their glow depending on their emotional state, making them the deep-sea version of mood rings. Except the stakes are higher, and the audience includes predators with remarkable attention to detail. Yet one of the most surprising uses of bioluminescence is for camouflage. This sounds counterintuitive. Why would glowing help an animal hide? But in the deep sea, the rules of visibility work in reverse. Many creatures practice counter-illumination, adjusting the brightness of their underside glow to match the faint traces of light from above, turning themselves nearly invisible when viewed from below. It is like wearing a glowing invisibility cloak, calibrated to cancel your silhouette. In some species, the intensity of this camouflage is so finely tuned they can adjust their brightness to match passing shadows or shifting water clarity. It is camouflage so advanced, it makes chameleons look like they are still figuring out how to match plaid. But the most enchanting part of bioluminescence is the artistry with which it appears. Some animals produce rolling waves of light across their bodies as they swim, leaving luminous trails like underwater comets. Others pulse with rhythmic flashes that seem almost musical, as though they are performing silent light symphonies in the void. A few creatures emit patterns that mimic the shimmer of distant prey, creating optical illusions to trick predators into chasing ghosts. These displays are not random. They are sculpted by millions of years of evolution to be efficient, strategic, and occasionally theatrical. What makes bioluminescence particularly powerful in the midnight zone is that it is one of the few things you cannot fake. You cannot carve a glowing sign out of rock. You cannot paint yourself with reflective pigments. If you glow, it is because your biology has embraced a toolkit that surface creatures rarely need. Light becomes your accent, your defense, your conversation, and your strategy all at once. In a place where darkness rules, glowing becomes a quiet rebellion against the void. It is life asserting itself in a world where the universe seems determined to conceal everything. Bioluminescence is not merely a tool, it is a language, a survival strategy, and sometimes a performance. It turns the midnight zone into a theatre of living stars, each creature writing its own message across the darkness. And in this silent, shadowy world, nothing stands out quite like something that dares to shine. Predation in the midnight zone is not a dramatic chase scene. It is not a sprint, a tackle, or a spectacular clash of titans. Hunting down here is a quiet, calculated, slow-motion duel in which one side has evolved to remain unseen and the other has evolved to avoid becoming an involuntary snack. If the surface ocean resembles a bustling market, the midnight zone feels more like a dimly lit alley where the residents have mastered the art of waiting. And waiting, and waiting. Because down here, a predator might go days or even weeks without encountering a proper meal. So when food finally arrives, hesitation is not on the menu. The first thing you notice about predators in this region is that jaws are not merely functional. They are architectural statements. Take the classic deep-sea hunters, known for jaws that unhinge far wider than physics, would suggest polite or necessary. Some fish possess rows of sharp, needle-thin teeth angled inward, forming a kind of biological no-exit sign for anything unlucky enough to swim too close. Even small predators often sport mouths that seem several sizes too large for their bodies. Like nature misplaced the order or got carried away designing them. This exaggeration is not vanity, it is survival math. When you might only get a meal every few weeks, you do not want your dinner to swim in, bump into your teeth, and then immediately swim back out while you panic, thinking, was that food? Did I miss my one chance this month? Then there are the hunters that rely on stealth, which feels almost like cheating considering the entire environment is already pitch black. But darkness alone is not enough. Prey here have adapted to notice the slightest disruption, so predators must elevate invisibility to an art form. Many coat themselves in ultra-black tissue that absorbs nearly all ambient light. They become so optically stealthy that even bioluminescent flashes glide past without revealing their outlines. Imagine wearing a cloak so dark that even light photons decide not to bother interacting with you. In the midnight zone, this is not fantasy couture. It is everyday wear. On top of visual invisibility, predators take advantage of slow, deliberate movement. Down here, a sudden rush would announce your presence like someone slamming a door in a silent library. The best hunters drift, glide, or hover, conserving energy while keeping their silhouettes as unobtrusive as possible. Some even angle their bodies to minimize the tiny pressure waves produced by their fins. It is underwater espionage at its finest. If James Bond were a fish, he would take notes. Other predators prefer to let the world come to them. In an environment where travel requires energy you might not have, waiting becomes a strategy. Some deep-sea hunters possess long, motionless bodies that resemble debris or drifting seaweed. If seaweed had a mouthful of dental nightmares, they sit suspended in the water column for hours, conserving every calorie, until something small and unsuspecting wanders too close. Then, with the precision of a sprung trap, the predator snaps forward, swallowing the victim before the poor thing realizes that the branch it bumped into was practicing patient homicide. But the midnight zone is also home to predators who hunt by manipulating the senses of their prey. Some produce faint glimmers, not bright enough to alarm, but just enough to pique curiosity. When a potential meal investigates the subtle shimmer, the predator lunges, not dramatically, but efficiently. Because down here, Efficiency means you live to eat again. Other hunters mimic the appearance or movement of harmless creatures, luring prey toward what looks like a safe companion until the illusion dissolves into a pair of jaws. Perhaps the most disturbing predator strategy in this region, however, is the ability to simply not look edible. Down here, your best defense is to appear either too spiky, too gelatinous, too enormous, or too confusing to bother with. But predators twist this logic around, disguising themselves as unappetizing blobs until the moment they decide to reveal their true intentions. Picture a soft, harmless-looking gelatinous form floating serenely, only for it to unfurl hidden tentacles or reveal a mouth large enough to swallow something nearly its own size. In the midnight zone, being unappetizing might actually make you more dangerous, and size, contrary to expectation, is not always an advantage. Some predators rely on being small, almost toy-like, allowing them to approach prey without triggering the usual alarm responses. Tiny hunters take advantage of their inconspicuousness, creeping close enough to nip, stab, or swallow. Meanwhile, larger predators develop elongated bodies and wide mouths specifically so they can engulf prey at surprising distances, snatching meals that thought they were well outside arms or fins' reach. Predators here are experts of timing. They must be. When you live in a habitat where meals are rare and movement is costly, you cannot waste energy on failed attempts. Every strike is intentional. Every bite matters. Every tactic is honed by the reality that the next opportunity might not drift by for days. And the result is a world where hunting looks nothing like the surface ocean. There is no bold pursuit, no frantic chase, no dramatic breach from the water. Instead, the Midnight Zone's predators embody stillness, patience, precision, and deception. Their attacks unfold like quiet punctuation marks in a sentence written entirely in darkness. In this shadowed world, the truth is simple. If you do not look edible, you have a chance. If you do look edible, you had better hope the predators are taking a nap. But down here, naps are rare and hunger is constant. If there is one universal truth about the Midnight Zone, it is that being seen is rarely a good thing. Visibility is basically an invitation for something larger, hungrier, or more determined to consider you a convenient snack. So the residents of this lightless world have perfected camouflage in ways that make surface-dwelling animals look like they are still practicing for a school play. In the deep sea, camouflage is not about blending into the background. It is about erasing your presence entirely, becoming so visually forgettable that even light itself has trouble finding you. Let's start with ultra-black skin, one of the most astonishing adaptations in the abyss. Some deep-sea animals have skin so dark that it absorbs more than 99% of the light that hits it. That is darker than a moonless night in a cave wearing blackout curtains. These creatures are essentially biological light traps. Any photon that dares approach is swallowed whole, scattered through pigment-packed structures until it never escapes. If you placed one of these animals on a table in a lit room, it would look less like an organism and more like a silhouette cut out by an artist going through a dramatic phase. Ultra-black skin turns them into voids, holes in reality, shape without detail. For predators that rely on even the faintest trace of reflected light from bioluminescent flashes, ultra-black camouflage is the abyssal equivalent of going stealth mode. But ultra-black camouflage is only one approach. Many deep-sea animals take the opposite route. They choose transparency. Instead of absorbing light, they avoid interacting with it at all, Jellyfish, delicate fish larvae, and even some crustaceans drift through the darkness with bodies that resemble floating glass sculptures, if glass sculptures were capable of sprinting away at the first sign of danger. Their organs are minimized or arranged to reduce shadows. Their muscles and tissues are tuned to be practically invisible. Even their digestive systems are streamlined, because nothing ruins the invisible aesthetic like a half-digested meal glowing faintly inside you, like a suspicious lantern. Transparency in the deep sea is not about beauty, it is about denying predators a target. If you cannot be outlined, you cannot be caught. And yet achieving transparency is an engineering challenge worthy of a science fiction writer. Blood, for example, is naturally pigmented, which is problematic if you are dedicated to the invisible lifestyle. Some animals solve this by drastically reducing the number of oxygen-carrying molecules in their system, while others distribute pigments so sparsely that the colors barely register. Evolution essentially told them, look, if you want to vanish, we need to make some interior design compromises. And they agreed. Then there are the creatures who go a different route entirely and cosplay as darkness itself. They do not just avoid being seen, they imitate the absence of features. Many species evolve irregular body shapes that break up their outlines, making their form harder to interpret. Others possess fringes, filaments, or lumpy textures that mimic drifting debris, like miniature performance artists playing the role of unidentifiable ocean thing number 7. When seen from below, they do not look like animals, they look like background noise. Some fish take this to elegant extremes by flattening their bodies until they resemble wisps of shadow. Others adopt coloration gradients that appear to dissolve into the water around them. Their edges blur, their silhouettes soften, and they seem to fade into the darkness, the way a faint memory slips from your mind. The result is camouflage that does not simply hide them. It makes you question whether they were ever there at all. One of the more astonishing strategies is reflective camouflage. A number of deep-sea creatures have mirror-like scales that scatter whatever tiny bit of ambient light drifts through the water. Instead of absorbing or avoiding light, they reflect it in ways that mimic the background perfectly. If transparency is the strategy of pretend you are not solid, reflective camouflage is the strategy of pretend you are not anything. The reflections shift with the water, matching not just the darkness, but the flickering glow of faraway bioluminescence. These animals do not disappear by becoming dark. They disappear by becoming everything around them. But perhaps the strangest form of camouflage is the one that requires no color at all: stillness. Many animals rely on the simple fact that anything motionless in the deep sea becomes incredibly difficult to detect. Movement creates vibrations, disturbances, shadows, signals that predators can trace. So some creatures have mastered the art of doing absolutely nothing with world-class dedication. They hover in place, like underwater mannequins, drifting just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough to reveal themselves. In a world where motion can be a fatal mistake, relaxation is a survival strategy. And yet, even with all these adaptations, the most surprising aspect of deep-sea camouflage is its sheer diversity. Transparency, ultra-black pigmentation, reflection, disguise, stillness. Each strategy evolves to solve the same problem, but does so through radically different physics. It is as though evolution set up a design competition titled "How to Avoid Being Dinner," and every species submitted a wildly inventive entry. Some were sleek and engineering heavy, others were minimalist, some were downright bizarre, but all were effective. Camouflage in the midnight zone is not simply about hiding. It is about negotiating a world without light by mastering the loopholes in visibility. Some creatures delete their shadows. Some delete their reflections. Some delete their edges. And some, impressively, delete the concept of looking edible altogether through visual confusion so complete that predators simply decide they have better things to do. Down here, survival means blending not just into the environment, but into the darkness itself. The midnight zone is a world where sight is unreliable, light is rare, and the best way to stay alive is to become something that cannot be seen, or something the ocean refuses to look at twice. Dining in the midnight zone is not an everyday affair. It is more like fate spins a cosmic wheel, and occasionally, if the universe is feeling generous, it lands on food. When it does, deep-sea creatures launch into action with feeding strategies that range from clever to downright theatrical. Because when meals drift by unpredictably, sometimes weeks apart, you cannot afford modesty, hesitation, or a delicate palate. You eat first and ask evolutionary questions later. Down here, culinary etiquette is less use the correct fork and more extend your body to improbable proportions and swallow whatever just bumped into you. One of the strangest and most effective feeding strategies involves the use of lures. Not fishing lures, though the similarity is uncanny. These living bait systems come in all shapes and sizes, some dangling like eerie ornaments, others shimmering faintly like ghostly street lamps. The animal displaying the lure remains perfectly still while its glowing or twitching appendage performs the underwater equivalent of whispering, "You should come closer." No, really, closer. Curious prey, who really should know better by now, approach the enticing light, mistaking it for a harmless snack, only to discover it is attached to a mouth they did not notice until it was too late. This predatory patience can last hours, even days, with the hunter barely moving, maintaining the kind of stillness that yoga instructors only dream about achieving. But when subtle trickery fails, the midnight zone offers a different solution: become a walking stomach. Some animals have mastered the art of extreme expandable anatomy, allowing them to ingest prey far larger than themselves. Their stomachs stretch with elastic grace, ballooning outward in a manner that would make even the most flexible gymnast feel underqualified. Picture a creature the size of a loaf of bread successfully devouring something the size of a bicycle helmet. That is not exaggeration, it is Tuesday. These expandable stomachs are not merely oversized storage units, they are evolutionary insurance plans. When food comes along once in a blue moon, you do not nibble politely. You devour every possible calorie because you do not know when the next edible object will stumble into your vicinity. Then there are the engulfers, animals that have evolved the uncanny ability to swallow prey by unfolding their mouths into enormous net-like traps. Their jaws hinge open with dramatic flair, sometimes extending into shapes that defy the basic rules of geometry. It is as though their bodies operate on a secret stretch mode unavailable to the rest of the animal kingdom. These predators do not chase. They wait until something unwittingly drifts into their proximity, open wide, and let the ocean currents do half the work. It is feeding via strategic laziness, and it works beautifully. If these creatures had inspirational slogans, they would read, "Why pursue your meals when you can simply become the doorway they accidentally drift through?" But not all midnight zone animals rely on dramatic physical maneuvers. Some employ chemical strategies, releasing attractants that drift through the water like invisible invitations. A faint scent trail entices small creatures who investigate, because in the deep sea, curiosity is both a survival instinct and a career hazard. Others produce sticky filaments that function as biological flypaper, capturing tiny organisms that drift too close. These strands float like delicate threads until something brushes against them. Then the trap closes, slowly reeling in the tiny meal with the determination of a very patient fisherman. Scavenging is another major component of deep-sea dining. When something large dies in shallower waters, maybe a fish, maybe a seal, maybe a whale, the body begins to sink, drifting slowly toward the ocean floor. To the animals of the midnight zone, this descending corpse is not a tragedy. It is the equivalent of winning a gourmet lottery. The arrival of such a meal is so rare that creatures will gather from surprising distances, drawn by complex chemical traces leaking from the drifting feast. They nibble, scrape, tear, and burrow into the carcass with gusto, turning it into a temporary banquet hall, lit only by bioluminescent diners. If the surface ocean is full of fast food opportunities, the midnight zone is where the occasional catered event occurs, and no one wants to miss it. Many deep-sea animals have also adapted slow metabolisms to match this unpredictable dining schedule. They move gradually, conserve energy religiously, and treat every calorie like a priceless heirloom. When food is scarce, they wait. When food arrives, they transform into living vacuums. Some species store nutrients with remarkable efficiency, packing away reserves to survive long periods with nothing but the occasional particle drifting by. Others dramatically slow their bodily functions, almost as though putting themselves into low-power mode, eliminating unnecessary movement to stretch their last meal into the foreseeable future. But perhaps the most bizarre part of midnight zone feeding is that animals here rarely get to be picky. Many predators swallow first, speculate later. They ingest creatures with spines, tentacles, and defensive tactics that would make any sensible surface predator hesitate. Down here, beggars truly cannot be choosers. If it moves and it fits, or even almost fits, it counts as food. Humorously, you could say that deep-sea dining resembles an all-you-can-eat buffet, where the buffet items wander in one at a time, unpredictably, with the enthusiasm of someone who forgot they RSVP'd. Sometimes the buffet item never arrives. Sometimes it arrives oversized. Sometimes it arrives glowing. But when it does arrive, the residents do not waste time asking questions. They dig in, stretch out, expand their stomachs, unhinge their jaws, and toast to another day of surviving the world's most inconsistent meal schedule. In the midnight zone, feeding is not just a biological necessity, it is a performance, a marvel of evolutionary creativity shaped by scarcity and opportunity. Each strategy is a reminder that life, even under crushing pressure and in absolute darkness, will always find increasingly bizarre ways to get dinner. If the midnight zone had a motto, it would probably be something along the lines of move less, live longer. Down here, calories are not just precious, they are mythical, like treasure coins scattered randomly through a vast, dark ocean. Every creature must guard its energy like a dragon, hoarding gold. Because spending too much at the wrong moment can mean the difference between survival and quietly fading into the water column. Life has evolved such a spectacular assortment of low-energy strategies that if there were an Olympic event for doing absolutely nothing, deep-sea animals would not only win, they would redefine the scoring system. The foundation of this lifestyle is an exceptionally slow metabolism. For many midnight zone creatures, the internal engine runs at a pace so leisurely it makes tortoises look impatient. Their bodies are designed to use the smallest amount of fuel possible, stretching every calorie into an impressive display of efficiency. They do not burn energy for warmth. There is no warmth to maintain. They do not spend energy chasing prey. Prey rarely shows up, and when it does, it usually wanders close enough to be intercepted without athletic heroism. Their tissues are often gelatinous, water-filled, and lightweight. requiring minimal energy to build or maintain. It is not laziness, it is physics dressed up as biology. This slow metabolic life also explains why many deep-sea creatures grow at a snail's pace. A fish might spend years reaching the size that a shallow-water cousin achieves in months. Some individuals might not reach reproductive maturity until long after most surface animals have lived entire generations. Growth takes energy, and down here, energy is the ultimate luxury item. The result is a population of creatures that live long, slow, deliberate lives, conserving their biological resources as though they are on an eternal budget plan. Movement, too, is pared down to an art form. While animals in brighter waters dash about with the enthusiasm of caffeinated hummingbirds, Midnight Zone residents embrace minimalism. Many hover effortlessly using tiny fin adjustments, drifting on currents like sleepwalkers who forgot to take a step. Others position themselves strategically, letting the water bring nutrients or prey their way instead of swimming off on bold expeditions. A few species move so infrequently that if you watched one for a while, you might wonder whether it had confused staying alive with meditative statue practice. A common strategy is to reduce muscle mass, because muscle requires energy, both to build and maintain. Instead of powerful propulsion systems, deep-sea creatures often rely on soft, flexible bodies that move with the grace and urgency of a slowly waving curtain. They do not sprint, they sway. They do not lunge, they glide. Their bodies are shaped by the rule: never spend energy you cannot afford to lose. But energy conservation extends well beyond the physical. Behaviorally, these animals are masters of patience. Predators wait for hours in perfect stillness, trusting that the next meal will eventually wander their way. Scavengers remain suspended in the water column, drifting passively as they search for faint chemical clues that a meal may have arrived somewhere nearby. Even social interactions, when they occur, tend to be streamlined and efficient. There is no high-speed chasing, no elaborate dances, just signals, approaches, and departures conducted with the absolute minimum of movement. Some species reduce the cost of living by simplifying their sensory systems. Eyes may be tiny, absent, or reduced to shapes that detect faint gradients rather than crisp images. Why invest in high-powered visual equipment when there is no light to use it? Others rely heavily on slow, passive sensing methods that do not require constantly updated input. Feeling vibrations or smelling chemical cues requires less energy than maintaining large neural structures dedicated to fast-paced processing. Evolution has trimmed off anything unnecessary, leaving behind a biological toolkit perfectly designed for low-cost survival. There is also the clever trick of neutral buoyancy, a way of existing in the water without sinking or rising. Many creatures fine-tune their body composition so they float effortlessly, eliminating the need to kick, paddle, or wiggle to stay in place. Their bodies include oils, gels, or lightweight structures that counteract gravity's pull with astonishing precision. They essentially become underwater balloons with slightly better manners. When you do not have to fight your environment, conserving energy becomes much easier. Some species take energy conservation even further by synchronizing their behavior with environmental cues. Certain animals feed only when they detect extremely specific signals, avoiding wasted effort. Others shift into metabolic slowdowns during lean periods, entering a state not quite hibernation but something close, biological low-power mode. Their heartbeat slows. Their digestion nearly stops. Their activity level falls to almost nothing. Yet they remain ready to react if opportunity suddenly drifts by. Even reproduction is adapted to the energy economy of the deep. Mating strategies are often designed to avoid long-distance searching or elaborate displays. Many species produce fewer offspring, but invest more carefully in each one. Some rely on chemical signals to find partners only when conditions are right, avoiding pointless energetic expenditures. From the outside, life in the midnight zone might look like an endless nap. But this is not laziness. It is efficiency perfected. Every movement, every breath, every internal process has been sculpted by scarcity into something precise and purposeful. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is done without a reason that ties directly back to survival. And in a strange way, these creatures reveal a truth about ecosystems. Energy shapes behavior. It shapes bodies. It shapes lifestyles. In a world where food appears unpredictably and vanishes quickly, the beings who flourish are those who have transformed conservation into a superpower. Compared to them, even the laziest house cat, belly up, snoring loudly, occasionally flicking a paw, looks like it is training for a marathon. If you think dating on land is difficult, try doing it in a place where you cannot see, where your neighbors are scattered miles apart, and where you might encounter another member of your species roughly as often as a comet passes overhead. Welcome to Romance in the Midnight Zone, a world in which finding a mate is less romantic candlelit dinner and more blindfolded cosmic scavenger hunt. Yet somehow, against all odds, deep-sea animals manage to keep their species going, employing methods so inventive and occasionally so bizarre that you could almost imagine evolution raising an eyebrow and saying, I guess that works. The first challenge is an obvious one: locating each other. In the sunlit world, animals rely heavily on sight, color displays, or visual signals. But in the deep sea, vision is not just unreliable, it is practically irrelevant. You cannot wink, you cannot flash bright feathers, and you cannot rely on looking your best, because no one can see you. So deep sea species develop long-distance strategies that bypass the visual entirely. One of the most common tools for mate finding is chemical signaling. Some species release clouds of pheromones that drift gently through the water, carrying a scented message like, "Hello, yes, I exist, and I would appreciate company." These chemical trails can extend surprisingly far, allowing potential partners to find each other by following faint gradients, as though solving an invisible maze. It is romantic in a way, if your idea of romance involves tracking smelly molecules through freezing darkness while praying they were released by the correct species. Other creatures use acoustic cues. In the absence of light, sound becomes a kind of underwater matchmaking app. Certain fish produce subtle vibrations or rhythmic pulses that travel great distances, announcing their presence to potential mates. Some sounds are delicate, almost musical. Others resemble taps or hums. In the vast stillness of the deep, these small noises stand out like a beacon. Two individuals might drift closer and closer, guided by faint signals they cannot see but can feel. Imagine flirting by tapping on a wall and hoping someone, somewhere, taps back. Then there are the animals that rely on touch, though not in the gentle, affectionate way. Many creatures possess elongated feelers, whiskers, or sensory filaments designed to detect nearby bodies with precision. Their mating encounters often begin with a cautious, exploratory brushing, like a handshake performed in absolute darkness by two participants who are hoping they have not just accidentally greeted a predator. Physical contact becomes both a greeting and a confirmation. Ah yes, you have the right number of fins. Wonderful, this might work out. But the deep sea is nothing if not innovative. and some of the most jaw-dropping reproductive strategies verge on the surreal. The most infamous example involves species in which males are drastically smaller than females, sometimes by a factor of hundreds. Males who encounter a female in the darkness understand that this is a once-in-a-lifetime event, literally. So instead of risking separation, they adopt a strategy that could best be described as permanent commitment, or perhaps romantic fusion, depending on your perspective. These tiny males latch onto the female's body and fuse into her tissues, linking circulatory systems until he becomes a small living organ whose sole purpose is to provide genetic material. It is partnership taken to its most literal extreme. You might call it devotion. You might call it clinginess. Either way, it works. Other species avoid physical fusion but still keep their partners close. When conditions are right, males and females gather in small groups, drifting slowly and releasing gametes into the water in synchronized pulses. These delicate cloud events are coordinated with astonishing precision, relying on environmental triggers like subtle changes in water chemistry or temperature. It is a quiet, drifting festival. No music, no lights, just the muted choreography of creatures ensuring their lineage continues. In species where individuals rarely meet, some animals take a more creative route by packaging their genetic material in special capsules built to survive long journeys. These packets drift like microscopic messages in bottles, carried by currents until they find a compatible partner. It is reproduction as a long-distance pen-pal arrangement, except the letters do not contain words. They contain destiny. Deep-sea brooding methods can also be delightfully unconventional. Some creatures carry eggs externally, attached in clusters or ribbons to their bodies. Others create protective sacs or gelatinous envelopes that float behind them like shimmering parachutes. By keeping their offspring close, these parents ensure that their developing young are not swept away into less hospitable regions. Parental care varies wildly, from species that hover protectively over egg masses to those that deposit eggs in strategic crevices and trust the ocean to handle the rest. Even the timing of reproduction is adapted for efficiency. Because the deep sea changes slowly, many species are not tied to seasonal rhythms, but instead breed opportunistically, taking advantage of sudden food influxes or environmental cues that indicate a temporary improvement in survival odds. Romance here is not based on moonlit evenings or blooming flowers. It is based on strategic math and environmental consistency, and yet, for all its strangeness, deep-sea reproduction carries a familiar warmth, a desire to ensure the continuation of life. Despite the cold, the pressure, the darkness, and the monumental difficulty of finding anyone at all, life persists. It improvises. It innovates. It finds connection in a world designed to isolate. In this silent galaxy beneath the waves, romance does not need sunlight. It survives through chemistry, sound, touch, and evolutionary creativity. It thrives in places where logic suggests it should fail. And in every successful pairing, whether a delicate chemical dance or a permanent, literal fusion, life in the Midnight Zone proves that even in a realm built from shadows, the drive to connect is unstoppable. If the Midnight Zone had a celebrity roster, a red carpet, and an awards night hosted by someone with too many tentacles, these three creatures would headline every category. They are the icons, the ones people imagine when they hear deep sea and instinctively picture something both mesmerizing and mildly alarming. Each species looks as though evolution spent a weekend experimenting with bold shapes and dramatic flair, producing designs that straddle the line between biological engineering and avant-garde sculpture. They are unmistakable, unforgettable, and undeniably theatrical. Let's begin with the anglerfish, the Midnight Zone's unofficial mascot, and perhaps the most unapologetically eccentric predator in the ocean. If the deep sea held auditions for the role of creature most likely to make someone whisper, "Is that real?" the anglerfish would win by default. Its appearance is a collage of intimidating features: a head that dominates most of its body, a mouth lined with interlocking teeth that point inward like a trap ready to shut with precision, and a body that seems almost secondary to its jaws. But the real showstopper is the lure, a glowing beacon perched at the end of a modified dorsal spine, dangling above the fish's mouth like a tiny lantern advertising questionable deals. This lure is a masterpiece of biological showmanship. It pulses or flickers subtly, mimicking small organisms and enticing unsuspecting prey closer and closer until they cross the point of no return. At that moment, the anglerfish performs its signature move, a lightning-fast snap that is both the beginning and the end of its victim's story. What makes the anglerfish such a standout is not just its appearance, but its unapologetic dedication to efficiency. It does not chase. It does not negotiate. It simply waits, confident in the power of its glowing "open for business" sign. Now, swing the spotlight across the water column to the giant squid, a creature so legendary that it spent centuries tiptoeing through folklore before modern science finally confirmed its existence. Even now, sightings are rare enough that every recorded image feels like catching a celebrity exiting through the back door of an exclusive venue. But its fame is well earned. The giant squid is a marvel of anatomical ambition. Massive eyes capable of sensing faint glimmers in the abyss, tentacles equipped with rotating hooks and suction structures, and a streamlined body built for sudden bursts of power. Those eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, are among the largest in the animal kingdom. In the Midnight Zone, having enormous eyes is like owning the world's most high-end night vision goggles. The giant squid uses them to detect distant movements, flashes of bioluminescence, or the shadowy outlines of rivals or predators. These eyes are not tools for observing beauty. They are tools for survival, tuned to pick up faint signals in a world otherwise stripped of visual information. And then there are the tentacles, long and flexible limbs that behave like a cross between grappling hooks and high-precision robotic arms. When prey ventures close enough, the squid launches its tentacles forward with a speed that seems physically unfair, seizing the victim and pulling it toward a sharp, parrot-like beak. The entire interaction is a blur, swift, silent, and efficient. It is no wonder ancient sailors invented myths about sea monsters pulling vessels into the dark. Meeting a giant squid unexpectedly would absolutely encourage a few dramatic stories. But for all its intimidating size and power, the giant squid is also a creature of mystery. Much of its life is pieced together from rare footage, drifting remains, and the occasional encounter between desperate squid and the deep sea's apex hunters. Every discovery adds another brushstroke to the portrait of a creature that remains enigmatic and hauntingly beautiful. And now, the final star of our deep sea tour, the vampire squid. Despite its theatrical name, this species is not an aggressive hunter, nor a bloodthirsty menace. In fact, it is one of the more gentle residents of the deep. Its name comes from its coloration, a velvety dark red, and from the cloak-like webbing that connects its arms, giving the illusion of a small, underwater cape. If superheroes existed in the midnight zone, the vampire squid would absolutely be the one who shows up fashionably late but steals the spotlight effortlessly. The vampire squid's adaptations are subtle but genius-level clever. Instead of chasing prey, it specializes in collecting drifting organic particles, tiny bits of marine debris often referred to as detritus. Using slender, sticky filaments that trail behind its body, it gathers this nutritious snowfall with the calm efficiency of someone casually collecting coupons from the air. This makes the vampire squid one of the few creatures whose feeding strategy could be described as both elegant and low stress. But its real claim to fame lies in its defensive tactics. When threatened, the vampire squid can invert its arms, pulling its cloak forward like a hooded cape, hiding its vulnerable body while exposing spiky-looking cirri along its underside. It becomes a floating orb of texture and mystery, a performance that says, "Are you sure you want to try eating this? Because I'm not sure you'll enjoy it." And if the predator persists, the vampire squid releases a cloud of bioluminescent particles, not ink, but glowing disorientation in fluid form. It is less smoke bomb escape and more surprise glitter explosion, which is arguably more stylish. Together, these three species represent the artistic extremes of deep-sea evolution. The anglerfish embodies deceptive beauty and efficient predation. The giant squid embodies power, precision, and mystery. The vampire squid embodies elegance, restraint, and surprising flair. Each one thrives in the midnight zone, not by following predictable rules, but by rewriting the rules in ways no one could have anticipated. And that is what makes them iconic. They are not just animals, they are evolutionary statements, shaped by darkness into forms that feel almost mythical. They remind us that even in the most remote parts of the planet, creativity flourishes, sculpting life into shapes that defy expectation and spark wonder with every reveal. If you imagine the midnight zone as a place of eternal stillness, you are mostly right, at least until the sun sets at the surface. Then, as though someone has pressed a cosmic commute button, the deep sea begins to stir. Creatures that spend the daylight hours hiding in the midnight zone suddenly rise upward in one of the largest daily movements of life on Earth. It is called DL vertical migration, but you can think of it as the ocean's equivalent of rush hour, except instead of honking cars and stressed-out drivers, it is a parade of fish, shrimp, jellies, and other drifting residents quietly heading to work in the dark. This migration is not a small affair. It involves billions upon billions of organisms, so many that if you could watch the entire event unfold from the side, the mass movement would resemble a living tide sweeping upward. During the day, these creatures stay deep, hiding from predators who hunt by sight. Once night falls, the darkness above provides a protective cloak, allowing them to ascend toward richer feeding grounds without risking everything. For them, nighttime means safety and access to a buffet of microorganisms blooming near the surface. Dawn, however, means everyone back downstairs immediately, and the entire process reverses with astonishing synchronization. Let's explore why this happens. The surface layers of the ocean teem with food. Tiny plankton, algae, and microbial snacks that grow best where sunlight still has an influence. If deep-sea creatures could freely enjoy these resources, they would. But there is a catch. Up there, the waters are full of predators with excellent vision. Sharks, fish, squid, seabirds. Everyone is looking for a meal, and anything drifting near the surface under bright daylight becomes a very visible target. So the solution is simple. Wait until the lights turn off. As soon as evening arrives, organisms emerge from the midnight zone and start moving upward in a slow, determined mass movement. The timing is spectacularly consistent. Creatures begin rising shortly after the surface dims, using environmental cues that act like nature's dimmer switch. Some detect fading ultraviolet radiation. Others rely on changes in the water's illumination. Some follow chemical signals as other migrants begin their ascent. However they do it, the coordination is uncanny. It is as if the entire community shares a silent group chat that says, "Sun's gone, snack time." When these migrants reach the upper layers, they begin feeding with a kind of restrained enthusiasm. They do not dart or thrash. That would attract attention. Instead, they graze, glide, and nibble with careful precision. Some target microscopic algae. Others feed on smaller animals also participating in the nightly commute. Certain species even adjust their position throughout the night, drifting up or down in subtle increments depending on where food is densest. It is rush hour, yes, but it is the polite version. No elbows, no pushing, no urgency beyond quiet survival. But while the nighttime ascent gets all the glory, the morning descent is equally fascinating. As dawn approaches, the first hints of light begin to filter downward. To surface creatures, this light is gentle. To deep-sea migrants, it is a blaring alarm clock that screams, "Get back to safety." The return trip is rapid, driven by instinctive mechanisms tuned to the smallest flicker of illumination. A single ray piercing the water is enough to initiate an entire population's retreat. They sink quickly, leaving behind the now bright surface waters and plunging back into the safety of the midnight zone, where predators struggle to spot them. During this downward commute, a strange layering effect occurs. Different species descend at slightly different speeds and depths, forming temporary stratified bands of life, drifting gently through the water column like biological traffic lanes. Some trail behind in slow motion, others drop quickly, using gelatinous bodies or specialized appendages to accelerate their descent. It is organized chaos, a shifting elevator of drifting animals returning to the deep. Once the migrants settle back into the midnight zone, the region transforms again, for a brief period. Predators, who specialize in ambushing returning commuters, take advantage of the influx. Some species position themselves strategically along the migration path, waiting like discreet pickpockets who know the exact moment a crowd will pass through. The midnight zone becomes momentarily busier, filled with soft ripples of motion, faint vibrations, and low-frequency disturbances. Then, slowly, as the last migrants settle, the region returns to its usual calm, quiet existence, almost as if nothing had happened. The impact of this daily migration reverberates far beyond simple feeding. It plays a crucial role in cycling nutrients throughout the ocean. When organisms consume food at the surface and then descend to deeper layers, they transport carbon downward, contributing to a process that helps regulate Earth's climate. This quiet commute influences everything from the growth of surface plankton to the chemistry of deep water. It is not just a movement of animals, it is a planetary scale mechanism disguised as routine behavior. Yet despite its enormous importance, diel vertical migration remains largely unseen. Most people will never witness this hidden traffic flow, and even scientists rely on advanced instruments to track it. The rising and sinking masses appear on sonar as shifting layers that move predictably each day, like living clouds drifting through the water column. When submarines or remotely operated vehicles pass through these layers, they encounter bustling corridors of life that vanish the moment light from the machines disturbs them. In many ways, this migration reveals the incredible adaptability of deep-sea residents. They might live in the perpetual night of the midnight zone, but they are intimately connected to the rhythms of the surface. They have synchronized their lives with a sun they will never see, responding to its presence and absence with remarkable precision. And so each evening, the midnight zone stretches, stirs, and prepares for the nightly ascent. Each dawn, it quiets again, settling into darkness until the next commute begins. It is a daily ballet performed in silence and shadow, an underwater rush hour that keeps the ocean alive, even though nearly no one ever sees it. As you drift through the midnight zone, this vast expanse of cold, still water, you might assume that nothing resembling a busy neighborhood could possibly exist here. But then, out of the darkness, you begin to see something improbable. Shimmering plumes rising like underwater smoke signals, flickering with distorted heat and surrounded by clusters of animals so densely packed they resemble crowds around a food truck that just announced free samples. These are hydrothermal vents, and they are some of the most fantastically alive places on the entire planet. They sit at the boundary between the midnight zone and the even deeper abyss, yet they break nearly every rule that governs the surrounding waters. A hydrothermal vent begins with tectonic restlessness. Deep beneath the seafloor, magma seethes, cracks open the earth, and heats ocean water that seeps down into the crust. That water, now infused with minerals and heated to temperatures that would vaporize life on the surface, erupts back out through vent openings as superheated, chemical-rich plumes. To the untrained eye, these plumes look like black smoke, but they are actually mineral particles, precipitating out of the water. Iron, sulfur, manganese, and other compounds bubbling up from deep within the earth. The whole system resembles a natural industrial plant operating in total darkness, except that instead of polluting what surrounds it, it sustains it. Because here's the astonishing part. In these chemically charged plumes, life thrives. Not by photosynthesis, not by feeding directly on falling debris, but by chemosynthesis, the biological alchemy of turning chemical energy into living tissue. Specialized bacteria and archaea take in the hydrogen sulfide spewing from vents and convert it into usable energy, much like plants convert sunlight. These microbes form the base of an ecosystem so productive that it stands in complete defiance of the idea that sunlight is necessary for life. If the rest of the midnight zone is powered by distant hand-me-downs from the surface ocean, hydrothermal vents run on an entirely different electrical grid, one that smells faintly of volcanoes and rotten eggs. The first creatures you notice around these vents are often tube worms, standing tall like crowds of ghostly white pipe organs. Some reach several meters in length, yet they have no mouths, no digestive systems, and no interest in catching their own food. Instead, they host symbiotic bacteria inside their bodies, tiny live-in chefs that perform chemosynthesis on their behalf. It is a remarkably efficient arrangement. The worm provides housing and stable conditions, and the bacteria supply nutrients, effectively turning the animal into a walking apartment complex, powered by volcanic fumes. If the deep sea had a real estate brochure, tube worms would be renting out prime property in a neighborhood with fantastic chemical amenities. Clustered around the vents, you also find vent crabs scuttling across mineral deposits, pale shrimp waving feathery appendages like miniature windmills, and snails armored with iron sulfide scales that look suspiciously like nature decided to create a medieval knight. These creatures live in a world of extremes. Water temperatures can shift from near freezing to boiling within a few centimeters, and the chemistry fluctuates constantly as the vent breathes and pulses. Yet they have evolved to position themselves precisely where the conditions are just right, warm enough to sustain microbial growth, cool enough to prevent accidental poaching. The communities themselves form layered neighborhoods. Closest to the vent opening are the extremophiles, organisms that not only tolerate high temperatures but seem to relish them. A little farther out are species adapted to moderate warmth, and beyond them are animals that prefer the gentler environment at the edges of the vent system. Each group depends on the chemosynthetic productivity happening at the core, and each interacts with the others through predator-prey dynamics, competition, and niche specialization. It is a bustling ecosystem, not in terms of speed but in richness, density, and surprising diversity. One of the most fascinating aspects of vent systems is their transient nature. A vent that pumps out mineral-rich plumes today might go quiet within years or decades. When that happens, the entire community must either move, adapt, or perish. New vents emerge elsewhere, and with them, new opportunities arise for colonization. The bacteria arrive first, settling onto fresh mineral surfaces. Then come the pioneers, larvae of tube worms, shrimp, snails, and other species carried by deep currents. Step by step, a new neighborhood springs to life, built around the same fundamental principle. Wherever the Earth leaks chemical energy, life will show up with astonishing creativity and start building. These vent ecosystems are more than isolated biological marvels. They are also clues to the origins of life on Earth. Some scientists believe that early life may have emerged in settings like these, where heat, minerals, and chemical gradients created the perfect laboratory for complex chemistry to begin. Even today, the microbes that power vent ecosystems are among the most ancient lineages on Earth, surviving conditions that would annihilate most organisms and hinting at life's incredible resilience. And while hydrothermal vents are visually dramatic, their broader influence extends quietly across the ocean. The minerals they release affect seawater chemistry. The microbial communities they support play roles in carbon cycling. The animals that grow and die around vents contribute to nutrient flows when their remains drift away. Even the plumes themselves seed surrounding waters with particles that become microhabitats for drifting organisms. It is strange and wonderful to realize that in the deepest, darkest reaches of the ocean, far from sunlight and solace, nature has carved out pockets of life that flourish with exuberance. Hydrothermal vents are reminders that even in the most unforgiving landscapes, life finds not just a foothold, but a stage upon which to thrive. These glowing, steaming oases take the midnight zone, cold, still, quiet, and transform it into something vibrant and unexpected. A neighborhood built on fire, fed by chemistry, and bursting with life no one imagined would be there. If you picture the midnight zone as a quiet, drifting cathedral of darkness, then marine snow is the soft, perpetual snowfall that keeps the entire congregation alive. It drifts continuously from the sunlit layers far above. A slow-motion blizzard of tiny organic particles that may not look impressive individually, but together form the main calorie stream that sustains much of the deep ocean. Think of it as Earth's most unusual food delivery service. One that sends down crumbs, flakes, and microscopic morsels instead of gourmet meals, and does so with the world's slowest estimated arrival time. Marine snow is not actually snow, of course. It is a mix of minute fragments, dead plankton, fecal pellets, mucus-coated debris, discarded exoskeletons, and delicate aggregates of organic material that clump together as they sink. It sounds unglamorous, and it absolutely is. But for countless deep-sea animals, this continuous shower of leftovers is more valuable than gold. It is the one reliable food source in a world where large meals are rare, fleeting, and unpredictable. While nothing about marine snow screams luxury, Everything about it screams survival. The journey of marine snow begins in the surface waters, where sunlight fuels abundant life. Tiny organisms feed, grow, reproduce, and eventually die, creating an ongoing supply of organic bits too small to be noticed by the casual observer, but essential to the ocean's grand food economy. Each piece starts to sink, bumping into other pieces along the way, sticking together, growing denser, and slowly descending like a feather that forgot how gravity works. The deeper it falls, the more it becomes a faint reminder of the vibrant world above, drifting toward creatures that will never know what sunlight feels like. For deep-sea animals, the arrival of marine snow is a kind of understated celebration. Many species position themselves to intercept it as efficiently as possible. Some sit perched on protruding rocks or ridges with arms or tentacles extended like gentle nets, hoping that passing particles will stick. Others sweep the water with slow, rhythmic movements that look almost meditative, gathering edible fragments into their mouths with deliberate, patient grace. A few species cast out mucus threads, yes, literal sticky snot strands, to trap as many drifting particles as possible. It is remarkably effective, though not exactly the sort of technique you would expect from creatures of such stoic mystery. What makes marine snow so valuable is not just its quantity, but its consistency. It does not arrive in bursts or disappear for months. It is always falling, everywhere, all the time. Even in the stillness of the midnight zone, where large organisms are rare and food scarcity shapes every biological decision, marine snow provides a quiet, dependable stream of nutrition. It may be low quality by energetic standards, scraps, crumbs, microscopic leftovers, but it never truly stops. It is the heartbeat of the deep ocean's food chain, subtle yet essential. On its long journey, marine snow does more than nourish. It transports carbon from the surface to the deep sea, locking it away in a natural storage system that helps regulate the planet's climate. Every sinking particle is a tiny vehicle of transformation, carrying carbon atoms that once belonged to living organisms down into the depths, where they may be consumed, reprocessed, or eventually buried in sediments. The world's climate depends on this biological pump, even though most people never hear about it, and even fewer have ever seen marine snow drifting through the pitch-black sea like confetti from an invisible parade. Deep-sea scavengers take full advantage of the bounty. Some swim slowly with their mouths open, filtering out particles that accumulate along their route. Others pore over the seafloor, picking at fresh deposits that have only recently arrived. If a slightly larger chunk of marine snow appears, a stray piece of exoskeleton or a dense pellet, competition can suddenly become competitive in a way deep-sea life rarely is. In a place where calories are precious, even a tiny scrap can feel like a windfall. And yet, for all the life it sustains, marine snow is heartbreakingly delicate. As it sinks, it breaks apart, gets consumed, and dissolves into progressively smaller pieces. By the time it reaches the deepest layers of the midnight zone, a large fraction of the original material has disappeared. This attrition is why deep-sea animals have evolved such astonishing efficiency, using low-energy lifestyles and remarkable digestive abilities to make the most of every particle that survives its journey. Some species rely so heavily on marine snow that their entire biology revolves around maximizing its capture. Their appendages form wide catching surfaces. Their feeding behavior shifts according to the density of falling particles. Their sensory systems detect slight changes in particle flow that might indicate a recent event at the surface, perhaps a bloom, a die-off, or the stirring of nutrients by storms. To them, marine snow is not background noise. It is the central metric of survival. Even the seafloor itself, blanketed in a thin layer of fine sediment, is shaped by the deposition of marine snow over millennia. Those quiet particles accumulate, layer by layer, forming an archive of ocean history. Embedded in those sediments are records of past climates, past ecosystems, and past chemical shifts. Marine snow feeds creatures, yes, but it also writes the ocean's diary. There is something beautifully poetic about a world powered by snow that never melts. Something astonishing about the idea that entire ecosystems depend on materials so small that in isolation it seems almost insignificant. And something quietly humbling about the fact that life in the midnight zone, separated from sunlight by unimaginable distances, still finds a way to connect with the surface through gentle, constant snowfall. Marine snow may not sparkle. It may not dazzle or glow, but it sustains, nourishes, and unites the deep ocean in a way no other resource can. It is the cosmic snowfall of the sea. Soft, steady, and absolutely essential. If superheroes existed in the ocean, they would not be patrolling coral reefs or surfing waves near the shore. They would be lurking in the midnight zone, quietly displaying abilities that make even science fiction powers look modest. Down here, under pressures that could crumple steel, in temperatures that flirt with freezing, and in darkness so absolute it makes night seem luminous, deep-sea creatures have evolved sensory and structural adaptations that feel less like biology and more like feats lifted straight from a comic book. Every animal that survives in this hostile realm carries with it a list of natural talents that push the boundaries of what life should be able to do. Let's begin with the superpower that sets the stage for all others: pressure tolerance. At depths where the midnight zone begins, the weight of the water above reaches hundreds of atmospheres. For context, imagine stacking a medium-sized car on every square inch of your body and then being told to walk that off. Submarines require reinforced hulls, precision engineering, and constant monitoring to survive such forces. Deep-sea animals? They glide through these crushing conditions as calmly as if they were strolling through a park. Their solution is elegantly simple. Instead of resisting the pressure, they become one with it. Most of their tissues contain no air pockets, no rigid cavities, nothing that can be compressed into a pancake. Their bodies are flexible, water-rich, and remarkably uniform in density, creating a biological architecture that shrugs off pressure the way humans shrug off a mild breeze. It is an adaptation that feels almost philosophical. When faced with overwhelming force, do not fight it, flow with it. Yet structural flexibility is only the beginning. Another astonishing set of adaptations comes in the form of enhanced eyes. Eyes designed specifically to extract meaning from gloom. Many deep-sea species possess eyes so large relative to their bodies that they resemble oversized orbs peering through the dark like biological telescopes. These eyes are not concerned with detecting shapes or colors. Their specialty is capturing the faintest whisper of light, tiny flashes of bioluminescence, distant glimmers from fellow residents, or subtle shifts that hint at movement. The sheer sensitivity of these eyes is staggering. They operate at light levels 1 trillion times dimmer than daylight, working tirelessly to turn near-nothingness into useful information. If a single photon wanders across their retinas, these animals treat it like a headline announcement. Other species go in the opposite direction and abandon eyes almost entirely. In a place where light barely exists, maintaining intricate visual equipment becomes an unnecessary expense. These creatures instead fortify their other senses, developing structures so attuned to vibration, pressure, and chemical signals that sight becomes redundant. Their bodies are covered in cells that detect swirling currents, subtle shifts in water density, and the faint signatures of distant movement. These detectors are not generalized. They are fine-tuned, precise instruments capable of reading the underwater world like a Braille novel written by physics itself. A passing ripple can reveal size, distance, direction, and even the emotional urgency of what caused it. It is not vision, but it is something arguably more intimate. The ability to feel the world's motion as though it were touching you directly. Perhaps the most surprising sensory adaptation belongs to species that specialize in detecting pressure gradients. In the midnight zone, water does not simply remain static. It flows, pulses, and shifts subtly. Some fish have evolved lateral line systems so sensitive they can detect a passing disturbance without ever seeing or hearing its source. Others possess internal organs capable of perceiving how pressure varies across tiny distances, allowing them to orient themselves or identify obstacles in total darkness. These are abilities that seem magical until you realize they are born from millions of years of refinement in a world where guessing wrong could lead to a swift and unpleasant end. And then there is the biochemical resilience woven into their very cells. Under extreme pressure, many molecules behave differently, bending or misfolding in ways that make normal biological processes difficult. But deep-sea organisms counter this with specialized proteins and chemical structures that remain stable no matter how intense the squeeze. Their enzymes operate flawlessly in conditions that would shut down nearly every metabolic system known on the surface. Their membranes maintain perfect fluidity, neither stiffening nor collapsing. Their DNA repair systems function smoothly despite living in an environment where almost everything seems designed to cause molecular chaos. It is not just survival. It is biochemical finesse that rivals the most advanced laboratory ingenuity. Some animals even carry adaptations that seem outright impossible, like the ability to detect electrical fields in a realm where visibility is non-existent. Subtle charges produced by muscles, nerves, or even drifting particles can serve as cues for predators or prey. A creature equipped with electroreception does not need visual confirmation to identify something alive. It simply senses the electricity that life inevitably leaks into its surroundings. It is an ability so effective that even sharks in shallower waters use it. But in the midnight zone, where almost every other form of perception is compromised, electroreception becomes a near psychic talent. And perhaps the most quietly impressive superpower of all is endurance. These animals withstand conditions that shift from scarce to unpredictable, from calm to chemically chaotic, often with lifespans far longer than their shallow water relatives. Their cellular systems do not simply endure hardship, they thrive under it. Their bodies are proof that the limits of life stretch well beyond what intuition suggests. Together, these adaptations form a tapestry of abilities so finely tuned to darkness and pressure that they redefine what it means to sense and survive. Deep-sea creatures do not navigate their world with sight, sound, or touch alone. They navigate with a whole-body awareness forged by evolutionary necessity, sharpened across countless generations, and polished by the relentless demands of a realm most animals will never dare enter. In the midnight zone, superpowers are not flashy. They are quiet, subtle, and essential. They are woven into the fabric of life itself, allowing creatures to thrive where machines struggle and where imagination falters. And as long as the deep ocean remains, these adaptations will continue their silent work, proving that survival, when pushed to its limits, becomes nothing short of extraordinary. If Earth had a set of hidden gears keeping the whole planetary machine running, many of them would be turning silently in the midnight zone. At first glance, this deep realm seems too quiet, too dark, too isolated to influence the world above it. After all, sunlight never reaches it, storms hardly touch it, and most surface creatures have no idea it exists. But the midnight zone is far from a passive bystander in the grand ecological story. It is an active, essential stabilizer that keeps nutrient cycles flowing, locks carbon away for centuries, and shapes the chemistry of the entire ocean with the subtlety of a stagehand adjusting props during a performance no one notices, but everyone benefits from. To understand this influence, imagine the ocean as a living conveyor belt of nutrients. At the surface, sunlight powers explosions of life, blooms of plankton that grow, reproduce, and eventually die. But these nutrients do not stay in the sunlit layer. They sink, drift, dissolve, and transform as they travel downward. By the time they reach the midnight zone, they have become the building blocks of a massive recycling system. Every small particle that falls into this region carries with it energy, minerals, and chemical signatures from above. The residents of the midnight zone intercept, digest, and repackage these materials, distributing them throughout the depths in a way that keeps the ocean from stagnating. One of the midnight zone's most impactful roles is its influence on the global carbon cycle. When organisms at the surface absorb carbon dioxide, that carbon eventually sinks as dead material or as waste products, slipping downward like messages in bottles sent into the abyss. In shallow waters, oxygen and heat quickly break down organic carbon, returning much of it to the atmosphere. But in the twilight and midnight depths, the rules change. Here, it is cold, dense, and slow-moving. Conditions that dramatically reduce decomposition. Much of the carbon becomes trapped in particles that drift deeper still, eventually reaching the abyss or seafloor, where they may remain for centuries or millennia. This process is often compared to a biological pump, except instead of moving water, it moves carbon out of the atmosphere. Without the midnight zone acting as a vast storage vault, our planet's climate would look very different. Temperatures would swing more wildly, atmospheric carbon would rise more quickly, and the surface ocean would become a less stable environment for life. The midnight zone does not advertise this service, but it performs it constantly, quietly helping regulate the global climate system simply by virtue of existing. But carbon storage is only one part of the midnight zone's influence. This region also supports nutrient cycling that connects surface waters with the deepest ocean trenches. Microbes flourish here, breaking down organic materials into simpler compounds that drift, dissolve, or get carried upward by slow-moving currents. These nutrients eventually return to shallower waters, supplying essential elements like nitrogen, iron, and phosphorus to plankton communities that rely on them to grow. Without this recycling, the surface ocean would gradually run out of nutrients, transforming into a biological desert despite its access to sunlight. What makes the midnight zone particularly fascinating is that while it functions as a recycling hub, it is also a gatekeeper. Not everything that sinks gets broken down quickly. Some materials pass through in nearly intact form, carried deeper by migrating animals or trapped in sinking aggregates. These pathways help regulate how much nutrient material remains in circulation and how much gets sequestered in deep layers. It is a balancing act performed by creatures who do not know they are performing it. Each feeding event, each digestive process, each movement shaping the chemistry of oceans thousands of kilometers wide. One of the most surprising contributors to this global regulation is the daily vertical migration of deep-sea organisms. Though earlier chapters explored the movement itself, Here we see how its consequences ripple through the ecosystem. Each night, countless animals rise toward the surface to feed, and each morning they return downward, carrying not just their full stomachs, but also nutrients ingested in upper waters. As they metabolize and release waste into deeper layers, they redistribute surface-derived nutrients throughout the water column. This quiet commute functions like a series of biological elevators, transporting materials that would otherwise remain stranded above. These patterns influence everything from fish populations to ocean acidity. When deep-dwelling organisms respire, they release carbon dioxide into waters that are naturally more capable of absorbing it. When they die, their bodies sink further still, providing long-term carbon storage, far from the atmospheric cycle. Even their waste plays a role, triggering microbial activity that transforms the chemical makeup of the region. It is as though the midnight zone is constantly editing the composition of the ocean, ensuring it stays chemically balanced enough to support life at every depth. Even beyond nutrients and carbon, the midnight zone regulates heat distribution in the ocean. Deep currents move slowly but steadily, carrying cold water across the globe. These currents pass through the midnight zone, interacting with the organisms and particles suspended there. The physical structure of the zone, the density, the temperature gradient, the suspended material, helps shape how these currents behave. Though it may seem unrelated to biology, this mixing helps stabilize Earth's climate, influencing weather systems thousands of miles away. What is striking about all of this is how invisible it remains. Most of the planet's biggest environmental services are performed in absolute darkness, by animals and microbes that no human will ever meet in person. They do not participate consciously in maintaining the planet's stability, yet their presence makes that stability possible. The midnight zone is not just a mysterious realm, it is a functional, essential component of Earth's operating system. And so as we reflect on this quiet, unseen region, we begin to appreciate its subtle power. It does not roar, it does not shine, it does not demand attention. But through its cycling of nutrients, its storage of carbon, and its influence on ocean chemistry, it helps regulate the very conditions that make life thrive on the surface. The midnight zone is the deep heartbeat of the planet, steady, uncelebrated, and absolutely vital. Exploring the midnight zone is a bit like trying to investigate the interior of a locked safe that sits at the bottom of a freezing ocean, is constantly under crushing pressure, and occasionally contains creatures who investigate you back with a mouthful of pointy skepticism. For most of human history, this realm remained purely hypothetical, imagined, speculated about, whispered into maps with vague labels like unknown depths. But curiosity is persistent, and technology eventually rose to the challenge, crafting machines bold enough, or perhaps naive enough, to descend into darkness that would flatten the unprepared. What we now know about the midnight zone exists because humans built vessels tough enough to survive and delicate enough to record details without spontaneously folding like a poorly constructed lawn chair. The earliest attempts at deep-sea exploration were crude but ambitious. Steel spheres, bolted shut and attached to long cables, were lowered into the depths with the hope that they would return containing something: data, notes, a survivor. But as engineering improved, these early prototypes gave way to sophisticated remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, robotic explorers equipped with cameras, arms, sensors, and an extraordinary ability to remain calm under pressure that would make even seasoned astronauts jealous. These ROVs travel down on cables that carry signals from ship to robot and back, forming a lifeline of electricity and information. Imagine playing a video game where the environment wants to crush your character. Your drone costs millions of dollars, and your respawn button does not exist. That is the daily emotional state of deep-sea ROV pilots. The most prominent advantage of ROVs is that they do not need life support systems. They can stay down for hours, even days, without worrying about oxygen, heat, or whether the coffee machine on the support vessel is working. Their robotic arms are capable of delicate maneuvers, grabbing samples, placing sensors, even gently scooping up gelatinous creatures who would disintegrate under anything less than precision handling. All of this while navigating a landscape where the visibility is so poor it makes a foggy night look like a brightly lit stadium. Cameras help, but even the best lights get swallowed by the darkness like flashlights aimed into ink. Pilots often rely on sonar, instrument readings, and years of experience interpreting tiny glowing screens. It is underwater detective work, but colder, quieter, and with more mechanical anxiety. Complementing the remotely operated vehicles are autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, free-roaming robotic wanderers that cruise through the depths without human control. They are programmed with missions: map an area, measure chemical gradients, record sounds, photograph the seafloor, and then released like robotic pigeons, but with much better manners and significantly higher research value. AUVs excel at covering large distances and collecting data with quiet precision. They glide through the darkness with no cables and no external commands, simply trusting the instructions embedded in their circuitry. It is science wrapped in courage, or perhaps in bold optimism. When an AUV goes missing, retrieval efforts resemble sending search parties into a black hole. Fortunately, most of them return, carrying memory banks full of invaluable insights. But if there is a crown jewel in humanity's exploration toolbox, it is the deep diving submersible designed to carry actual people. Enter the submersibles. Compact, heavily reinforced spheres or capsules built to withstand tons of pressure while keeping the occupants safe, dry, and ideally not panicking. These vessels rely on titanium hulls, thick acrylic viewports, flotation synthetics, and pressure-tolerant electronics. Inside, space is tight. You do not stretch, you do not pace, and you definitely do not bring anything that cannot handle being pressed flat by the most intimidating physics lesson on Earth. But what submersibles offer is priceless: the ability for human eyes to witness the deep directly. There is something transformative about sitting in a tiny sphere, staring out into darkness, until a creature glides into view, glowing faintly or drifting with alien grace. Scientists describe these moments as humbling, surreal, even emotional. After all, it is not every day that you meet an animal whose entire lifestyle defies everything sunlight-based biology ever taught you. Submersibles often come equipped with high-definition cameras, robotic manipulators, sensors, and arrays of lights that illuminate the world outside like a spotlight cutting across a black stage. And yet, for all their engineering sophistication, submersibles and ROVs face a comically universal challenge. The residents of the Midnight Zone do not care how expensive the equipment is. They do not care about research grants, delicate wiring, or the heartfelt hopes of engineers. If something glows, vibrates, or looks vaguely edible, a curious deep-sea creature may investigate it with admirable enthusiasm. Cameras get bumped by fish who mistake them for rivals or snacks. Thick cables get nibbled by animals with more teeth than restraint. Lights attract wandering predators who swim up, stare directly into the lens, and then open their jaws as though auditioning for a horror movie. One ROV camera feed famously revealed nothing but a giant mouth engulfing the lens for several seconds, followed by the robot's quiet protest of muffled scraping noises. Pressure is another relentless adversary. Every piece of equipment must be engineered with tolerances that seem almost absurd. Electronics sealed in oil-filled housings, metal frames curved specifically to deflect crushing force, buoyant materials capable of shrugging off pressures that would reduce styrofoam to a memory. Lights are constantly at risk of imploding. Cameras must endure both the cold and the squeeze. Even simple mechanisms, like hinges or bolts, become engineering puzzles when every moving part is subjected to external forces, equivalent to a dozen elephants sitting politely on them. Still, humans keep pushing deeper. New generations of robotic explorers now use artificial intelligence to make decisions on the fly. Improved sensors capture chemical traces, temperature fluctuations, and acoustic signatures with unprecedented clarity. High-resolution mapping tools transform the deep-sea floor into detailed landscapes. Even fiber optic tethering systems are being refined to transmit clearer signals through the crushing depths. And through all of this, the Midnight Zone remains a frontier, one accessible only through technology that somehow balances precision, resilience, and humor in the face of unexpected fish interactions. Exploring the deep is an act of constant adaptation. People create machines to investigate creatures who, in turn, test those machines' durability with perfectly natural curiosity. Humanity continues to push downward, discovering new species, new phenomena, and new wonders with every dive. And though the Midnight Zone sometimes tries to chew on our robots, we keep coming back, because meeting the unknown has never stopped being worth it. For all the submersibles we've engineered, all the robots we've lowered into the abyss, and all the data we've coaxed from the darkness, the Midnight Zone remains one of Earth's greatest keepers of secrets. It is a place that knows how to withhold information with the confidence of a magician who has been perfecting the same trick for billions of years. We shine lights into the dark, and the dark shines mystery right back at us. For every species we discover, for every behavior we decode, for every distant whisper of sound we manage to record, the ocean responds with a gentle, teasing reminder. You've seen one page of a 1,000-volume encyclopedia. Come back when you're ready for the rest. The truth is, our understanding of the Midnight Zone is astonishingly incomplete. We have mapped the surface of Mars with greater detail than the deep ocean floor on our own planet. Most of the creatures that live here have never been observed directly. Many species collected in nets arrive at the surface damaged or unrecognizable, leaving us with puzzle pieces from biological jigsaw sets that don't include the picture on the box. Every expedition feels like entering a library where all the books are written in cryptic symbols, and the librarians refuse to speak. One of the biggest mysteries is simply how many species exist down there. Conservatively, scientists believe we've identified only a tiny fraction, perhaps a few percent, of the animals inhabiting these crushing depths. And that fraction comes with caveats. Even the species we think we've catalogued may behave, feed, or reproduce in ways we have never witnessed. The deep sea is like a massive, constantly shifting costume party, and every time we try to peek inside, we catch only glimpses of silhouettes slipping behind curtains. This leads to irresistible speculation about what still hides in the dark. Could there be giants larger than anything we've imagined, drifting just out of view? Possibly. The giant squid was once considered a sailor's fantasy, yet it turned out to be very real and very large. Could stranger forms exist, ones that use unfamiliar chemical pathways or possess sensory abilities we haven't conceived of? Absolutely. Life in the deep is known for reinventing the rules, bending biological conventions, and showing off evolution's flair for creative problem-solving. If bizarre organisms exist anywhere, they exist in the midnight zone. Take sound, for example. We regularly detect mysterious deep ocean noises, booms, hums, long calls that have no confirmed source. Some turn out to be shifting ice shelves or underwater earthquakes, but others remain unexplained, archived in research records with names like the bloop or upsweep, as though christening them might make them less baffling. For every mystery solved, 2 new sounds appear, reminding us that the ocean is a composer who specializes in puzzles rather than melodies. Then there are the strange visual encounters. Fleeting shapes captured on camera that never reappear. Shadows drifting just beyond a submersible's lights, or translucent forms that dissolve before investigators can determine whether they were animals, debris, or hallucinations caused by sleep deprivation and cold coffee. Researchers share these moments with equal parts excitement and frustration. It is hard to study something that appears for 5 seconds, glows faintly, then vanishes into the black, as though it had never existed. Even hydrothermal vents, those fiery oases described earlier, may hold secrets we haven't glimpsed yet. Entire clusters of species might live exclusively around vent systems that no human or robot has ever reached. The midnight zone spreads across more of Earth's surface than all land combined, meaning that every deep-sea ridge, every canyon, every isolated plateau could harbour its own miniature ecosystem, complete with residents adapted to local quirks we cannot yet imagine. It is like trying to understand a forest after examining only 2 or 3 trees. One area particularly ripe for mystery is behaviour. Deep-sea creatures are so rarely observed in their natural environment that we often have no idea how they interact, court, defend territory, raise offspring, or navigate complex social cues. A species might appear solitary in our footage, simply because we happen to film it during its introverted hour. Others may display group behaviours we have never witnessed, because our equipment arrived on a slow Tuesday, instead of the bioluminescent equivalent of a holiday festival. The midnight zone is full of rituals and dynamics unfolding in permanent darkness, unseen by any observer except the animals themselves. Even physical structures in the deep ocean resist explanation. Strange mounds appear on the seafloor with no obvious cause. Perfectly arranged lines of small stones have been discovered miles below the waves, too orderly to be accidental, too puzzling to classify. Tracks etched across the sediment hint at creatures that crawl or drag themselves for reasons unknown. Some formations look almost geometric, prompting debates that range from sensible hypotheses to wild theories popular with people who own telescopes but do not always use them responsibly. And then, of course, there is the ocean's personality, mischievous, withholding, and surprisingly adept at comedic timing. Lower a camera, and a curious fish will swim directly into it, obscuring everything behind a giant eyeball. Deploy a robot to explore a promising cave, and the tether will snag on a rock at the exact moment the camera picks up something intriguing. Peer into a chasm full of mystery, and a passing creature will suddenly release a cloud of glowing particles, turning your footage into sparkly confetti and ensuring you learn absolutely nothing about what you came to see. The ocean keeps its secrets because it can. It hides them in pressure, darkness, cold, silence, and vastness. But perhaps it also does so as a reminder. Exploration is never finished. Discovery never complete. The midnight zone invites us to wonder, not by giving answers freely, but by showing us just enough to keep curiosity burning. And so, every expedition ends with the same collective realization. The more we learn, the less we know. The ocean smiles, figuratively of course, because that is exactly how it likes things. Its greatest magic trick is not any single creature or phenomenon. Its greatest magic is mystery itself, a never-ending performance staged in darkness, waiting for the next brave audience to descend. Imagine the last light from the surface disappearing above you, shrinking into nothing, until the water around you becomes a perfect, seamless black. You are drifting now, suspended in a place that feels less like part of Earth and more like the interior of a dream. Quiet, vast, indifferent, yet thrumming with a strange, persistent pulse of life. It is here, in this darkness, that the midnight zone stretches out in every direction, a realm that refuses to be governed by the familiar rules of biology, physics, or comfort. And as you hover in this final chapter, watching small sparks of bioluminescence flicker like rebellious stars, you begin to understand why studying this region matters, not just scientifically, but philosophically, emotionally, and even existentially. For scientists, the midnight zone is one of the last great frontiers, a frontier so immense and unexplored that it makes the idea of knowing our own planet feel endearingly optimistic. Every descent into this place carries a sense of cinematic weight, like opening a door into the unknown. Cameras switch on, lights sweep across darkness, and the moment illumination touches a creature that no one has ever seen before, you feel the same rush of discovery that early explorers must have felt when they first spotted distant continents rising from the horizon. Except here, the discoveries tend to have more teeth and fewer postcards. But the importance of the midnight zone goes far beyond the thrill of finding strange creatures. It represents Earth's most dramatic experiment in innovation. In a region with no sunlight, crushing pressure, and limited resources, life has not only endured, it has flourished with startling creativity. The adaptations seen here are not minor tweaks, they are reinventions of what it means to exist. Light-producing organs bloom where eyes struggle, stomachs stretch into improbable chambers, bodies flatten, lengthen, thicken, or turn transparent. Sensory systems evolve into something bordering on poetic, a delicate reading of vibrations, scents, and chemical whispers in the dark. Every creature you encounter down here is a lesson in possibility, a gentle reminder that nature does not fold under difficulty. It recalculates, rewrites, and occasionally throws out the rulebook entirely. And that, perhaps more than anything, is why the midnight zone commands such awe. It is a living argument against the idea that harsh environments are barren. It is proof that life is not simply reactive, it is inventive. Studying this region also expands our understanding of life beyond Earth. If organisms can thrive in darkness, feed on drifting crumbs, harness chemical energy, and survive pressures that would turn our ribs into decorative coasters, then perhaps life could exist in other shadowed worlds, beneath the ice of Europa, inside the subsurface oceans of Enceladus, or anywhere a spark of chemistry meets persistence. The midnight zone becomes a planetary ambassador, waving its glowing, oddly shaped residents like flags that say, "Life is stranger and more durable than you think." Beyond astrobiology, exploring the midnight zone has practical significance for our own planet. Much of Earth's carbon cycle, nutrient flow, and ocean chemistry depends on the quiet work done in these depths. To understand climate, you must understand the deep ocean. To understand biodiversity, you must explore the places where most of that diversity still remains uncatalogued. To predict the future of ecosystems, you must pay attention to the regions where change is subtle but globally influential. The midnight zone is not a passive abyss. It is an active component in Earth's life support system. And then there is the human part of the story. The midnight zone forces us to confront our own curiosity in its rawest form. Imagine being on a ship in the middle of the night, sending a robot into the dark, waiting for the first images to appear. There is anticipation, of course, but also humility. Because the ocean, indifferent and enormous, does not reveal itself easily. Every moment of clarity, a drifting squid, a ghostly fish, a cluster of organisms glowing softly as they feed, is a gift. You cannot demand answers from the deep. You can only ask, gently, and hope the ocean answers in its own time. In a world where so much information is instantly accessible, the midnight zone remains deliciously resistant to quick understanding. It asks us to earn our knowledge, to innovate, to be patient, to embrace wonder rather than convenience. It reminds us that mystery is not the enemy of knowledge. It is the fuel that drives it. Without the pull of the unknown, science loses its spark. As you rise back toward the light, your mental submersible lifting through the layers, you carry with you an expanded sense of Earth. You have seen glowing hunters that dangle living lanterns, towering communities built on volcanic chemistry, animals shaped like whispers and shadows, and ecosystems that operate on rules so different from ours, they feel like fiction. And yet, they are real. They are here. They are part of our world. The midnight zone is not empty. It is not silent. It is not barren. It is a vast, dynamic, imaginative workshop where evolution experiments boldly and persistently. Studying it matters because it reveals what life can be when pushed to its limits. It matters because it safeguards climate, biodiversity, and planetary balance. And it matters because it stirs something ancient and profoundly human in us. The desire to understand. The thrill of discovering what lies just beyond the beam of our lights. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Earth still has secrets worth chasing. In the end, the midnight zone reflects not just the resilience of life, but the resilience of curiosity. It challenges us to keep exploring, to keep questioning, and to keep believing that even in the deepest darkness, there is always something extraordinary waiting to be found.